I'm delighted to welcome today Mary Beauchamp, who is the author of Radical Health Makeover. That's the short title. What's the official title, Mary?
Radical Health Makeover, the Science and Spirituality of Self-Healing.
Marvelous. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for sparing time today.
Thank you, Elaine, for having me. Appreciate it so much.
So I know a big thing with you is talking about metabolic health. What do you mean by that? What is metabolic health, and in particular, what is metabolic syndrome? Because we hear a lot about that, but what actually is it?
That's a really good question. Well, so the definition of metabolic dysfunction is really rooted in what I would say is called insulin resistance. So many people, so the metabolism is the little energy production system in our cells. So when we don't have a healthy metabolism, our body can't produce energy in the most efficient way. And one of the main reasons for that is because people are mainly focused on fueling their body with glucose. And when we do that year after year after year, those mechanisms sort of get worn out, you could say. They get a little rusty, and our body then becomes resistant to the insulin signaling, which is there to actually let glucose into our cells so that we can utilize glucose for energy. However, when we do this um, exclusively year after year after year, at some point, usually around menopause for women or a little bit later in midlife or later life, this occurs, but it's happening now more and more and more, even in children, or even young children are becoming insulin resistant, which leads to weight gain, diabetes, and also insulin resistance of all the cells. So insulin affects every cell in the body, and it's a it's needed to get the glucose into the cell. However, when the cells are overstuffed with glucose, the cells resist or sort of shut. They sort of shut the door on glucose, and they say, we're overstuffed. There's no more room for more glucose to enter the cell. So they become desensitized to the insulin, essentially. So that's what we call insulin resistant, when the cells become resistant to letting more glucose in. And it's really a protective mechanism. So our body is designed to protect us from excess glucose in the cells. And when we have too much circulating in the body, it gets stored in places that it shouldn't, like the gut, like the liver, like the bloodstream, in different places in the body. So if we want to resolve that, the way to do that is to literally diminish the amount of glucose that we have in our cells, in our liver, in our muscles, and start to deplete the storage of glucose. And then our body has access to another fuel, which it's designed to run on efficiently, even more efficiently, which is fat. And when we run out of glucose or deplete those stores, our body shifts over and starts looking for fat as the next fuel source in line. And that's when we can start to recover our capability to burn two fuels instead of just one. So instead of primarily just burning glucose, our body is well designed and perfectly made by our genetic coding to be able to burn two sources of fuel. But most people, for their whole entire life, starting at birth, or even the moment that a baby gets formula or something other than breast milk, it's then really switching in and out of these states of burning fat for fuel and glucose. By the time a child is old enough to eat solid food, usually they're just on a glucose burning path from that point forward, because we've all sort of been taught that by the food pyramid, the dietary guidelines, that we should be eating mostly carbohydrates. So no wonder this is an epidemic issue. But the thing that's so fascinating to me is that I just came from a symposium of metabolic health in San Diego, California, just this last weekend. And of all the researchers and scientists and doctors and pharmacologists and health practitioners that were there, what is well known in the literature is that our body, number one, was designed to burn on two fuel sources, not just one. And that every disease that we see, no matter if it's a brain degenerative disease like Alzheimer's, dementia, even panic attacks and depression and anxiety, and certainly cancer. They're all metabolic diseases. They're all rooted in metabolic dysfunction. So if we can make those parts of the body more sensitive to the insulin, that function can come back. And that's what's really exciting to me.
So the word glucose, some people would translate as sugar. How does the sugar and the glucose fit together, or don't they?
Yeah. So all carbohydrates turn to glucose in the blood. And we measure that. The measurement that we take when we check our blood glucose is, we call it blood sugar, but essentially it's the same thing, just two different ways to word it. And the layperson would probably think of it as blood sugar, but the doctor or the health practitioner might see that as blood glucose, but it's really the same thing.
Cool. And metabolic syndrome, what is metabolic syndrome?
So metabolic syndrome is characterized by several different things. One is a waist circumference that is larger than it should be, right? So if your body fat mass is in excess, then that's one aspect of it. The other is high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, and yeah, those are the main characters of metabolic syndrome. So it could be obesity, diabetes show up in those ways typically, and also autoimmunity, cancer, things like that. Yeah, I met a doctor last weekend. Her name's Amy Berger, and she wrote a book called The Alzheimer's Antidote, and she looked at thousands and thousands of studies on Alzheimer's patients, and all of them mentioned that Alzheimer's, which is now by doctors being called type 3 diabetes, all of them had insulin resistance of the brain. And so what she was speaking about this time, after this is 6 years after she's written that book, is that in her continued search in the research, she's noticed that, it's clearly evident in the medical literature that not only is Alzheimer's a symptom of insulin resistance of the brain, but so are so many mental disorders or mental illnesses as well. And even Parkinson's, dementia, anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, schizophrenia. These are all symptoms as well of metabolic syndrome. So it's not just diabetes, which we think of diabetes and obesity. That's the main things that people think of when they think of insulin resistance, but it really goes far, far deeper than that.
I remember years ago, I was probably, I don't know, 8-10 years old, something like that. And my uncle, it was in hushed whispers because of the shame of it. He was diagnosed with sugar diabetes. We used to call it sugar diabetes. Now, it's diabetes, but I think because the word sugar has been dropped,
yes,
I guess on purpose, people don't associate diabetes with sugar. And it's really very simple, isn't it? But looking at what we eat, how we eat, when we eat, all that kind of stuff, we can reverse these conditions, but we're not taught that, are we? So
absolutely.
I think
yes.
Did you have a background in nursing, Mary?
Yes, I do. I'm a registered nurse, and my very first job out of nursing school was in a metabolic clinic in Sacramento, which was run by Dr. Stephen Phinney, who is one of the godfathers, you could say, of this whole research movement looking at metabolic syndrome. And so he did a lot of research in that lab, in that clinic, and it was super fascinating. And so I've always known that this is an issue that needs to be looked at, but there was nobody else talking about it at the time. 25 years ago, nobody was talking about metabolic health or metabolic syndrome, or how to reverse it. And now we know that by changing your diet, you can reverse type 2 diabetes, which is the sugar diabetes that you're speaking about. We know that you can reverse obesity. We know that we can reverse so many other diseases, particularly, autoimmunity and cancer are also associated with excess glucose in the blood, right? So the work of Dr. Thomas Seyfried. Are you familiar with Dr. Thomas Seyfried?
Yes, I am. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So he's really one of the pioneers as well, along the same lines as Dr. Stephen Phinney. But Siegfried was working mainly with cancer patients. Dr. Finney was working mainly with diabetics and obese patients as well. So, but it's the same underlying root cause that I think we just have put different names on so many diseases, even PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is rooted in insulin resistance of the ovaries. So we're learning so much now about insulin resistance that it's really exciting because we know that we can reverse it, and that's the good news.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've had 4 different versions of cancer and kidney disease, but the cancers most certainly were reversed by the diet and nutrition. And I had stage 4 cancer in 2015, and I beat it in 3 months. And that was
Wow.
and I teach all that, you know, now to people. But it's doesn't matter what the condition is. I've become known as somebody who helps people reverse cancer, but that's not ideally what I'm. You know, I don't want that on my gravestone type of thing, because you know, I want people to, you know, wake up that, you know, we don't need to get to that silly point of you know, for some people, no return. I was told that I would die within a year if I didn't do all the chemo and the radiation and all the, you know, all that stuff. No, I'm not going there. So I chose. I I wasn't listening fully when I had my first 2 breast cancers. So I ended up having stage 4 or something else. So that was my really wake up call that, right, okay, I haven't been listening. I've got to listen now. So I chopped off all negativity. I juiced like a ninja, so getting high nutrition into me, no sugar, of course, no dairy. And the solution is the same, doesn't matter what the condition is called, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, you know, all the rest of it, gout, goodness knows
Yep.
what, it's all the same solution. And that's what, we're not taught any of that. So that's my message to the world. Just look at what you're eating. I've just been dealing with a lady, a client who has been given a diagnosis of MS, multiple sclerosis. She doesn't have MS. She has mercury poisoning. She has an over amounts in her body of calcium and magnesium, which is causing untold mineral imbalances. And the symptoms of the MS are in line with the symptoms of the medication that she's on, the side effects, and the symptoms caused by the mineral imbalances and the mercury, high level of mercury. So we're not told all this, and she's been given another load of medication which she's not going to take because she now knows how to fix it. She's seen the evidence of the testing that I do. So what kind of support do you provide to your clients? How do you work with your clients?
Well, I do individual coaching. I have a few courses as well: Keto for Cancer, Keto for Weight Loss. So basically, what I want to do is help people resolve this underlying insulin resistance and shift their metabolism into a state of therapeutic nutritional ketosis. So I help people make that shift as smoothly and easily as possible, and give them all the tools that they need to have in place to make them become the master of their own metabolism, the boss of their metabolism, if you will. And so once you have these tools in place, it's easy to see how you can manage this for the rest of your life. This is not a quick fix. This is a lifetime of a lifestyle change that's long term, and it's something that can be used forever. For some people, maybe if you have a severe seizure disorder, you need to be in high levels of ketosis all the time to prevent seizures, for example. If you're going through a cancer treatment protocol, you want your ketones to be a little bit higher. But essentially, when you shift to burning fat for fuel instead of glucose, your body's going to start to produce ketones as a byproduct of that fat metabolism. And that's the part that gets exciting, because you can measure this, you can see it for yourself, and then you can always know how to manage your own metabolism. And you take, at that point, the prescription pen out of your doctor's hand and write your own ticket to wellness.
Absolutely. You mentioned ketosis and keto diets and so on, and the books and the courses. So can you explain to the listeners what is a ketogenic diet? Why is keto such a big thing at the moment? Because when you look on the internet, there's so many different types of diet, and typically diets do not work. However, this is not a diet, is it? It's a lifestyle. So can you explain a bit more for the listeners, please?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the keto diet, I don't even see it as a diet. It's
No.
not like nobody can take credit for this, okay? Because it was designed by your and my and every other human being walking the planet. It's been designed by our own genetic blueprint. So it is coming from our own body's wisdom in its creation to be able to do this and to be able to shift back and forth between glucose burning and fat burning as a survival mechanism. It was wired into our DNA. This is a diet that nobody can put their name on. Nobody can claim it for themselves. It is not a diet. It is a physiological state of the metabolic function that is termed therapeutic nutritional ketosis, because you are actually inducing this. And this was something that humans always had access to during times of famine, during times of intentional fasting, for religious reasons, whatever the reason was. As evolving humans, we needed to have this backup mechanism in times of starvation and when we did not have food available, which was most of the time. So when humans were probably more likely in ketosis most of the time as evolving humans than not. And so, we would come across the berry patch or the ripe fruit tree, very randomly, and not very often, a honeycomb or something like that, where we would be inundated with glucose, but it was not happening every single day when we can go to the supermarket and eat fruit year round that's not in season, that's shipped across the world, so that we can always have access to not only processed foods, which were highly addictive, that most people are struggling to get out of their diet, but also just even the fruits and vegetables that we never had access to as, evolutionarily. So this is a mechanism that our body is intelligently designed to be able to do when it's given the tools. So in my work, I just want to give people those tools so that they have them and they can use them whenever they want. It may be seasonally, it may be yearly, it may be that some people have to be in a state of ketosis all the time. Like I said, if you're doing a cancer protocol, or you have seizures or Alzheimer's or dementia, and you really want to stop that progression, it's a little bit more serious than somebody who maybe just wants to lose weight, right? Which may take a little bit longer if you're in and out of ketosis. And then, these things, it's not to say that being in a state of ketosis all the time is for everyone, but it's something that I think everyone should know how to do.
So ketosis equals balance?
Ketosis means that you're in a state of fat burning. If you're in ketosis, you are producing ketones, and those ketones are a direct byproduct of fat metabolism. So you're burning fat for fuel if you measure your ketones. Yeah, and it's really important. It's a great thing to be able to measure, and we have simple testers now that you can measure this, and also your blood sugar. So as your ketones go up, your blood sugar is going to go down. And to recognize that inverse relationship, you can do anything with that. You can basically take control of your own metabolism if you know how to induce this state of ketosis.
And obviously now the big question, how can people induce ketosis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I have a book called How to Start a Keto Diet the Right Way, 3 Must-Do Steps. It's a free ebook. You can find it at radicalhealthmakeover.com. And it walks you through this process. Basically, what it comes down to is reducing your carbohydrate intake enough so that your body shifts over to burning your own body fat for fuel, and it will also burn whatever you're eating in the way of dietary fat. So it sort of switches back and forth between burning your body fat and your own dietary fat that you're consuming. So if your carbohydrates are reduced enough, which is usually for most people around 20 to 30 grams a day, that will get most people into ketosis. Yeah, I would say 20 grams, 0 to 20 grams, absolutely 100%. I've never seen anybody who wouldn't be producing ketones if they're consistently eating 20 grams of carbohydrates a day or less.
What would that look like on our plate? 20 grams of carbs?
Oh
Can you give
boy.
me some examples?
An eighth of a cup of blueberries.
Oh, two
Uh-huh.
blueberries.
Blueberries. I mean, they're a fruit, a berry, so they're higher in fiber and lower in sugars and carbohydrates than a lot of other fruits. Maybe a quarter of an apple, maybe an eighth of a cup of white rice, maybe yeah. So when you cut out carbohydrates, you have to increase either fats and or protein. So you can't just remove one food group, one entire group of macros, and not increase the other two, if that makes sense. So a ketogenic diet, a therapeutic ketogenic classic diet is 10% of your intake of calories comes from protein, about 80 to 90% comes from fat, and the other 10 to 15 would come from protein. And that's a classic ketogenic diet for seizure disorders, major seizure disorders. But a lot of people, you can change that ratio in many different ways depending on where you are in your life cycle. And that's the thing. It's not a one size fits all. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to, cut out all my carbs. And people do that, but essentially you have to find what your body needs and what works best for you. And that's a very individual process.
When you're talking fats, 80 to 90% fat to some people sounds horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
So what, I mean, there's so many different types of fat. What do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, I recommend stable fats that are not high on the toxicity level. Okay. So that would be the more stable the fat, the more solid it will be at room temperature. So these are saturated fats. This could be coconut oil. It could be saturated animal fats, such as butter, ghee, or tallow. Those are my favorite fats. So coconut oil, butter, ghee, and tallow, those are all saturated fats that are solid at room temperature. They are safe to heat and cook with. The things that are very inflammatory and bring in a lot of toxicity to the body are the processed seed oils. So I would definitely avoid those. They're highly inflammatory and they cause a lot of problems. And especially for people that have issues with their gut, intestinal permeability, or any autoimmune processes going on, that would be the last resort for fats. And in fact, I believe that you should avoid those fats 100%. They are not fit for human consumption. They are industrialized seed oils, highly processed, very inflammatory.
How about olive oil?
Now, olive oil is not as high on the toxicity list. It is not technically, you can make olive oil out in the olive orchard with a press. So that is not what I would consider an industrialized seed oil. It's not made in a factory. And it's a little bit more protective than the other vegetable or seed oils. I use the word interchangeably. They're called vegetable oils, I think, just to make them sound healthy, but in reality, they all come from seeds. The canola, the corn oil, the soybean oil, the sunflower oil, all those oils come from essentially seeds. So seed oils and vegetable oils are off the chart, off the radar, off the plate. This should not be part of your daily diet. Olive oil is the exception because it is cold pressed. So that makes a big difference. It's not heated and the molecules are not destroyed in the factory at very, very high temperatures where they have to use these high temperatures to extract the oil from a seed. It's not easy to get oil out of a seed. So very high pressure, high heat, and then they have to deodorize it, degum it, filter it, bleach it. I mean, these are highly processed oils. So that is not the case with olive oil. It is, like I said, a bit more protective, but I do work with a lot of people that have severe inflammatory issues in their digestive tract, Crohn's, IBS, things like that. They can't tolerate even olive oil or coconut oil.
So you'd recommend ghee or tallow to them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. So you mentioned 80 to 90% fat. So what else can we have? I mean, obviously we don't sit down and have a meal of ghee or tallow or coconut oil or something. So what else can people have?
Well, I mean, I don't think of food as fats, right? So there's high fat foods, but the fat in your diet when you're doing like a strict keto diet is going to be one of those saturated fats. So I don't really count coconut meat or avocado. I mean, those are higher fat foods, but they don't really count because they also have protein and carbs in them. So, and fiber. So in terms of just the 100% fat, those would be the healthy fats to use. So you could use those fats to cook your food in. You could even saute some low carb vegetables in those fats, as a way to increase your fat intake. But essentially, you also need to increase your protein intake because, like I said, you can't live on just 90% fat.
Yeah,
You will
exactly.
become, yeah, you will become quite nutrient deficient. So there's a balance between the protein and the fat. Excess protein will also convert into glucose in the blood. So you have to be a little bit mindful of the upper limits of your carbohydrate threshold, I would say. And everybody needs to discover that for themselves. So everybody's different. You know, for you, you might be fine eating 50 grams of carbs a day. And for me, I may never be able to produce ketones eating 50 grams of carbs a day. It really depends on how insulin resistant the person is, and you can regain that sensitivity. So let's say you're overweight and you want to lose 30 or 40 pounds. You might be very strict at the beginning, but then as you approach your goal weight, you can add in more carbohydrates. You can also hopefully add in more exercise, which also helps to burn off glucose in the blood. And if you're, let's say you're pregnant or you're nursing or you're a bodybuilder or you're a menstruating woman, you would need more protein than somebody who's very sedentary and maybe not in a state of growth in their life cycle.
So, can you just recap on the percentages? Where do vegetables fit into this? What category do vegetables come into?
Well, vegetables are technically where most of the carbohydrates are going to come from in a well-formulated ketogenic diet. So those carbohydrates would come from low carb vegetables such as zucchini, cabbage, asparagus, onions, mushrooms, tomatoes. These are also vegetables that many people that have any kind of intestinal permeability, which we also call leaky gut, cannot tolerate. So just to put that out there, there are lots of anti-nutrients in some vegetables that are still low carb. So it's a process of discovering what works for your body and knowing how permeable your gut may be. If you have intestinal distress, IBS, Crohn's, things like that, any autoimmunity, you really have to eliminate most all plants, at least at the beginning, until your gut is sealed and healed. But then you can start adding more carbohydrate, low carb vegetables. So your plate may look like, because you can't see fat, right? So it's invisible. Once it melts, it's clear. You can't see the butter melted on your broccoli. Broccoli, cauliflower, those are also some other very low carb vegetables. So let's say you have a lot of broccoli and some sauteed low carb vegetables in some butter or ghee or tallow. You're not going to see that fat, right? So it's just going to be in there. And then you want to have some protein on there. So that could be a fried egg or a small piece of salmon or, something like that. So the protein ratios would be something more suited for each particular individual, depending on where they are and what their health goals are. So that's a little bit of a open space that can be determined. But it might look like something between 1 gram of protein per 1 gram of lean body mass, essentially, and up to 1 gram of protein for every 1 pound of body weight. So the protein range is very wide and very vast. And doctors have determined, even in the international body of dietitians, have determined that there is really no dangerous upper limit to protein as far as the science goes. But it's somewhere in that range of, I would say, 0.8 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of lean body mass to 1.5 grams of protein per 1 kilogram of lean body mass. So there's a formula there. And I help people work through that and use some tools and gadgets, you could say, to track this for them. And it will do a really good job of that. I use Chronometer as one of the apps that you can download on your phone that helps you track your macros. So again, the main thing about getting into ketosis is reducing your carbohydrates enough so that your body shifts over and starts burning fat. The protein is essential for growth and repair. The fat is going to become your fuel, and the carbohydrates are just kind of like icing on the cake. You don't really, there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. So we've all been sort of led to believe, or brainwashed, if you will, that we should all be eating mostly carbohydrates. And that could not be further from the truth, because there actually is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient. Your body will produce, your liver will produce all the glucose you need from gluconeogenesis from your own body. So you can take fat and protein and turn it into, your liver will turn it into glucose essentially.
We've been conned, haven't we, for many, many years. And when you look at the food triangle, the food plate, however, different countries describe it differently, and you're looking at, at least 50% carbs on there, and it goes up and up, and all the goods. It should be the other way around, shouldn't it? It should be turned on its head. So,
absolutely.
Remind us where folk can get the starting leaflet, which sounds mini book, ebook. That sounds really helpful.
Yeah. So you can find that free ebook download at radicalhealthmakeover.com. And you can also find it on my website, ketogenicdietcoach.com.
Great.
And my book, Radical Health Makeover, the science and spirituality of self-healing, you can find on Amazon. I also have a companion transformation journal that goes with that hardcover book. And there's a soft cover and a Kindle as well. But it's more of a deepening of the practices that were presented in the book, and also accountability and daily journaling, and some basically tracking ways to stay, abreast of your need to track and really check in with your body and see how it's feeling. And so you can really monitor yourself and self-regulate your metabolism. So it really teaches you those skills to put into practice on a daily, as part of your daily routine, essentially.
Absolutely brilliant. And I think it's a great idea to have the accompanying journal, because we do need to be aware of what our body is doing when we have certain foods, and if we're eliminating some and introducing others, if we journal it, we've got a record there, because we can't remember, can we, one day to the next, what
exactly.
we've eaten, So I think that's a great idea. So remind us of your two websites again, Mary, please.
Yeah, so you can, my website is ketogenicdietcoach.com, just like it sounds. Okay. And then you can find my free ebook download at radicalhealthmakeover.com. You'll also see that on my regular website too, which is ketogenicdietcoach.com. And then you can find the books, Radical Health Makeover, on Amazon, and the journal.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time and explanation of what's it called, avoiding the confusion of keto, because there's a lot of confusion about it. So thank you so much, Mary.
You're welcome, Elaine. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.